Um, I just learned literally 30 seconds ago that I am to introduce the next speaker. And we just talked. Apparently the material was sent to me a long time ago, but it must have gone to my old email, so I never got any of it. So this is going to be the world's shortest and probably most inappropriate introduction, because as I have no material. But Marty Pedersen is a terrific designer. Worked with Kit, worked with others over the year. He's a wonderful man. He is the publisher and the fellow that makes Graphis magazine go, having bought it out quite a number of years ago at this point. And it's a wonderful magazine. Graphis does extremely high quality books of one kind or another from time to time. And I was particularly taken when this one came out, and I'm going to say 9 months, a year ago. As you will soon see, it's a compilation of absolutely stunning protest images of one kind or another by absolutely top caliber designers. And because I have no more material, let me introduce Marty Pedersen.
Thank you for having me. I'm not sure I belong here. I don't collect any ephemera. And the only thing, of course, is this book. By the way, Kit and we had a wonderful relationship for 10 years. And of course, the problem was he was away collecting flags, and I had and I had to do all the work. Kit, where are you? Totally untrue. I was honored to have him as a partner, and nobody works harder in this business, or actually service. Graphic design is a service, and he's brilliant at it. Politics, patriotism, and protest. I'm going to address them all. And memories. That won't go away for me, and which gave me the impetus that inspired this book. We're all products of our experiences, and in my case, it jump-started at an early age. The Germans invaded Norway, where I lived at the time, and my uncle was fortunate. He managed to get away just before they came in and came to the U.S. and was, of course, inducted into the Army immediately and was drafted. And then my father's younger brother and two of his friends escaped the occupation because the Germans had already come in a small, open, 16-foot double-ended boat with a 2-cylinder engine. And they went to Scotland. In inclement weather, they were swamped twice, and after 5.5 days, they made it to the shores of Scotland near Aberdeen. They were immediately arrested, of course, until found to be Norwegian patriots. They were then trained in the British spy school, and then came back with fishing boats from the Shetland Islands to spy on the Germans. The occupation, as it proceeded, the Germans mined the water around our coastline. We were near the coast. And then, of course, had brought, well, I shouldn't say of course, had brought Polish and Russian prisoners to build an airport as well, which was, of course, regularly and appropriately so strafed by the Germans, by the British during the war. This, of course, was fine with us. We hated the Germans for their invasion. However, our house just happened to be less than a runway length away from the airport. And sadly, especially during the night raids, they missed a lot. Those are other stories. I remember one day when a German ship carrying ammunition continuously strafed by the Royal Air Force, caught fire, and then ran for shore. When it exploded, it blew the windows out of our house and a number of other things. And I, curious as I was, and my other friends, we would walk the beach the next day, and we found unused life preservers, a whole mess of other things washed ashore. And I found the stern flagpole of the ship still with the German flag on it, which I threw away immediately. I didn't even want my parents to see that. But I brought some of this home, and then, of course, there were the bodies that washed ashore. To skip through history, there was a day, or rumors, because we couldn't have a radio, that Roosevelt had died. Everyone was deeply depressed, as if Norwegians didn't have depression to begin to deal with anyway at the time. As the war progressed, it started to go badly for the Germans, as we all know, and it resulted in them rarely getting supplied with food and fuel. The local people then had to feed the prisoners, or they would have died from starvation. I remember going with my mother to the wired prison camp to give loaves of bread and dried cod, for which my father had fished, to give to them. And I remember they gave us carvings back that they wanted us to have, and we felt we couldn't take them, but they insisted. I remember the Germans also coming to our farm at that time, and every other day would come for food, to beg for food, where they had a bucket that we would fill, or my mother would fill, with food on anything we could spare. My mother had me and my sister present at these times. We were both very thin, and she always related that she could not completely fill their quota because she had to feed us. As the time progressed, the older soldiers left, apparently to fight on the front elsewhere, and replaced by young boys, in German uniforms a bit too big for them in most instances. One of these days again, an older soldier came, a pilot in his mid-20s, with a young boy, and as my mother was filling the pail, he was staring at my sister and myself, and his lips started to quiver. Then tears came down his face, and my mother, who rarely spoke to the Germans, had to ask what was wrong. With trembling hands, he took out his wallet, withdrew a photograph, and along with a worn envelope, he placed a small photograph on the kitchen table for us to see. It was a portrait of his young lady, or his wife, holding the two children that resembled us. In the envelope was a letter that he had just received, related that they had all been killed. My mother grabbed my sister and myself and held us tight, and through tears related what a terrible war this was, and she was so sorry. The most words she had ever stated to a German. The moment has never left me. And then the great news, the war was over. My father came with a Norwegian flag that he unfurled, asked me if I could raise it on the German flagpole, which he had planted the day before. And after the Germans left, they were replaced by liberating soldiers from North Africa, British liberating soldiers. My first candy ever was handed to me by one of these soldiers from the back of a troop truck while I was walking home from school. I wanted it to last forever. It wasn't until years later in this country, because there was no candy at the time, I had never had candy before. It was years later in this country that I found out it had been a lifesaver. My father, of course, received received depressing news that his younger brother, Fridtjof, had been killed, as well as his two compatriots, each at different times during the war in the Norwegian underground. Books were later written on their heroism, so of course we continued hating the Germans. Then my uncle, who had escaped or left before, came back with a chest full of ribbons, proudly in an American uniform, having survived 4 years of war, including Normandy. We got a care package with small jars of peanut butter, miniature packages of cornflakes and other cereals. I think the package was about this big, filled about with every product, I guess, from many of the manufacturers of food in the US. And one of the most precious things was Wrigley Spearmint gum. It was a happy time. I became aware also that the pain of fear in my chest had left. Excuse me. The United States in those years was golden. People from every nation in the world dream of coming here to live, to prosper, and to be safe. Somehow my parents miraculously managed this. We packed with just a few belongings, my sister and I with a small knapsack each, and my parents each with a suitcase, one suitcase each, and not very much money I found from my father later. The courage it took with 3 kids to start a new life in a new country astounds me today. I remember sadly leaving my grandparents, they, of course, knowing they would never see us again. We sailed in steerage, very much like the Irish immigrants into a Titanic, with a very small cabin above the thump of the propellers. It was a rough passage, and I was seasick most of the time. I remember my father waking me one morning early, asking me if I would dress and come with him. I found it strange, since the ship was not rocking anymore, and I joined him. He took my hand, and we walked up multiple flights to the upper deck and went forward. And the sight of the New York City skyline ablaze with lights in the morning sky well, I have to it's a very common story of immigrants. I didn't realize this was going to happen here. Well, I'm such a wimp. Okay. Now, some political posters and statements from the book. Am I, okay. Yeah, well, you can read this. this part of this is being lost on the right. Um, I'm sorry, we're losing a little bit of the type here. Some of the stuff has been, I came here with a different program, unfortunately, other than what had been asked, and it had to be transferred, and I guess a little bit of it got skewed. There's captions for each of these in the book. You have to buy it, of course. Not true. Collateral damage. A lot of radical views here. This is apparently going to be true. His country, he can rest in peace. That's a very powerful poster. What might you think? Here is a very special person, which few people are aware of. He wanted it that way. General Lucian King Truscott Jr., he was instrumental in winning many important battles during the Second World War under Eisenhower. But his most impressive display on May 31st, 1945, was when he delivered a speech in Nettuno, Italy, to the troops he had led into battle there. Unfortunately, there is no transcript of Truscott's declamation. However, Bill Malden was there, who later won 2 Pulitzer Prizes as an editor and cartoonist covering the war, and he described Truscott's remarks. Here is his account. I'm sorry, you have to read this too. Unfortunately, I had it. This is another version of the story. I'm going to have to read this thing. And I quote from Malden. It was the most moving gesture I ever saw. He had come up to the die and addressed himself to the corpses of the troops he had commanded. It came from a hard-boiled, battle-wearied old man who was incapable of dramatics. The general's remarks here were brief and extemporaneous. He apologized to the dead for their presence here. He said everybody tells their leaders it is not their fault that men get killed in war, but every leader knows in his heart this is not altogether true. He said he hoped he would be forgiven for any mistakes he may have made, but he realized this would be asking a hell of a lot under these circumstances. He also said he would not speak about the glorious dead because he didn't see much glory in getting killed in your late teens or early 20s. He promised that if in the future he ran into old men or anyone who thought death in battle was glorious, he would straighten them out. He said it was the least he could do. And with that, he walked quietly away without looking back. Thank you. Unfortunately, a couple of things were lost here because it was my fault, unfortunately. At any rate, are there any questions? Yes. No, Yeah, no, these posters, I put this book out, and these posters were submitted by people internationally. Not only that, we went into our archives as well and chose things to be put in there. They were from diverse groups of people, obviously, many in contention with each other. But as you can see, my reasons for this book is really anti-war. I have more to say here, actually. I should do that. It didn't take me many years to realize that I couldn't hate the Germans any longer. Forgive me, I got scrambled this morning a little bit, nor anyone else for that matter. I believe that people are generally wonderful, and the same the world over. All nations, of course, suffer from their equal percentages of miscreants. The proof is America, which is made up of every nationality in the world, as we know, and it works. It is the politicians, however, that separate us all worldwide, and a great many of them kill people for profit and ego. We should, I think, bring back the Colosseum and have a Super Bowl for all the politicians only. And they would fight each other, and the winner would get the other's international bank accounts. And the people would be the audience. We've had a number of great presidents, and here is just one of them, Harry S. Truman. I don't know if any of you read McCulloch's book on him, for which he got the Pulitzer, but here was an amazing man. He used a term, the buck stops with me. That is, nobody else took a fall for any mistake in his administration. He took that responsibility. When Truman first came to Washington, he was dirt poor. When he left the office, he was still dirt poor. He never profited from serving the people. He was then on his own after a government car dropped him off at Pennsylvania Station, over with, on his own. No Secret Service, nothing. He and Bess walked into the station, astounded that a huge crowd was there to applaud him the whole time they walked to the train and even after it left. He, of course, I believe, would be astounded as to what is happening in our country today, and so I believe would our founding fathers. If any of us people were to do some of the things we allow our senators and congressmen to do, we would be in jail. I'm sorry I'm sounding a little radical here, and I'm looking, is there a door I can escape through in the back? The 2008 bank failure in the US, which we all remember, where our whole country was affected, as well as other countries in the world. Even little Iceland, with 250,000 people. 3 out of their 4 banks failed. The Prime Minister told the Icelandic people that they had to bail the banks out, just like they did in America. So guess what the Icelanders did? They protested. This resulted within weeks of the Prime Minister resigning. The bankers were arrested, tried in civil court, and they all went to jail and are still there today. Except for one bank that survived. It was run by Icelandic women. Yay. And when asked why they had not been tempted to invest in this fraud to be, they related that it sounded just a bit too good to be true, and therefore didn't believe it. And of course, we now know that our bankers knew exactly what they were doing. They pulled the biggest heist of the American people ever. Everyone was affected. And they are still free to do the same thing all over again. The March on Wall Street was not even near effective. And the people who attended the protest were slandered in our papers as being miscreants, which was absolutely untrue. Our press, of course, was controlled. I love this country. And I'm proud to be an American. It has been a gift to me. And it is clear to me that what this country desperately needs is more patriotic political and protest posters. So, okay, now more questions. Yes.
How old were you when you came to the United States, and where did your family settle, and then did you become an American citizen?
Yes, I was 9.5, to Brooklyn, without speaking a word of English, and actually, I was an American citizen. My parents had come here in the early 30s, briefly, for 2-3 years. Even in the Depression, it was better here than it was in Norway. Norway, by the way, at the end of the Second World War, was the poorest country in all of Europe. So not speaking a word of English into Brooklyn, Brooklyn was a melting pot at that time. Went to class, and fortunately I was ahead of everyone in the maths and sciences, which was true of most of the European schools. But learning this language, oh my God, it was difficult. When I did finally learn it, I learned it with a Brooklyn accent, so I had a Norwegian Brooklyn accent. And when I went to upper grades in college, actually, I then realized why people left every time I opened my mouth. Who was this foreign hood? And I went to found a teacher who could give me elocution lessons. I was where I had an accent, but not when I heard myself then on a wire tape recorder. You're all much too young to know what that was about. And I was appalled. And I had a sore mouth, lips, and tongue for like maybe a couple of weeks. And then, however, I don't think I've mastered it yet. I'm still working on it. But thank you. But the wonderful part of Brooklyn at the time was that mix of immigrants. My second week, I got a note in English that had to be translated. I was invited to an Italian family for dinner. And I came there, and it was a huge table on a Saturday night, noisy as blazes. Scandinavians were very quiet at the dinner table. That's not what, it's not like we didn't have conversations, but this was like, wow. And the mother looked at me, and she said, oh, Mamma Mia, and I got food. Yeah, exactly. I got food that was just extraordinary. And then the father with his oldest son, and the whole family was at the table, a noisy lot, and they got into an argument. And I started to feel uncomfortable. It got fairly intense, and they got to stand up as well, and they were at each other. Now, my father, he was a tough guy. He was a fisherman and the rest of it. He had a chest out to here. And I remember at the end of the war, Norwegians celebrating with bare-fisted fights. I mean, not a great way to celebrate. But I'm thinking these guys are going to go at each other, and I started to get uncomfortable. The mothers came there, and she said, look at the rest of the table. No one was paying any attention. And now they're making up, and they're hugging each other. Ooh, what is this? Men didn't hug in my generation. And then they're kissing each other on the cheeks, hugging and crying. I would have been a hell of a lot more comfortable had they beat the shit out of each other. But I learned from that. I'm a hugger. I am the Italian in my family. Yes, I'm sorry.
Like our previous speaker, you seem like someone who was probably never really going to retire. Incredibly passionate about your beliefs and what you do. Are you working on anything currently?
Well, I'm producing about 6 or 7 books a year, and a magazine which I had to stop some years ago, because it was, it's too long a story, but I'm bringing it back at a risk to my non-profitability. It's been a heck of a venture. I bought Graphis with a huge mortgage years ago, and fortunately managed, but through all kinds of crises. The exchange rate drop is too long a story. It's been, I'm passionate about my work, to come back to answer your question, as is Kit. And I'm certain the same with all of you as well, and your passion for collections and the rest of that. That keeps you alive. The day that you decide not to do anything and retire, then you sit down and you die faster, believe me. And that's been proven. And even, lots of things on that. And I've questioned retirement, because friends of mine who did retire at 55, 60, proud of it and the rest of it, the next thing I get phone calls from them, please come and join us. And then the term that was used with many of them, we're busy now. Well, what do you mean you're busy now? Because what took place is when they did retire, which we all look forward to when we're working, hard, which I'm sure we all did, that break, well, how long does that last before you're wondering what the blazes you're going to be doing? And now to know that you've quit your job and it's all over with. So now they're going to pottery classes and things like that and say, ooh, I don't want to do that. Not that I've nothing to do with pottery, but that you know what I'm talking about. So, passion, it's what I absolutely insist on for any of the interns who comes to work with me. I know Kit does the same thing. And if they're not passionate about the work, it doesn't work. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.